Yes. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Kesubos Daf Tzadi Ches, and we're starting at the Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down, almost 2/3 of the way down on Tzadi Zayin, Amud Beis. The Mishnah reads as follows: if a woman was machra, she sold a field for the sake of her ksuba. So machra ksubasa o miksasa, she sold a field in order to capture her ksuba, or even only part of her ksuba. Or mashkana ksubasa o miksasa, or she put up a property as a mashkon for her whole ksuba or for part of her ksuba. Or nasna ksubasa la'acher o miksasa, she gave over the field to a friend for the sake of collecting for her ksuba or for only part of it. Then the halacha is lo simkor es hashi'ar ela bebezdin. So let's say that she only sold properties to get to 50% of her ksuba. So the Gemara says, lo simkor es hashi'ar, if she wants to go back and sell more properties in order to get to her full ksuba volume, she's not allowed to do that ela bebezdin. So we place a limit on her, even though she has yet to collect her full ksuba. The halacha is this way. Oh, I should say the halacha is this way. The Tanakama holds that if she does something with only part of her ksuba, then she can no longer do the rest of the sale of her ksuba unless it's in bezdin. The Chachamim Omrim completely disagree. Mocheres hi afilu arba b'chamisha pa'amim. Let's say she wants to sell 5 properties. Each of them is a fifth of the cost of her ksuba. No problem. She can do them outside of bezdin. So we have a machlokes between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. Umocheres the mizonos shelo bebezdin. Everyone agrees that when it comes to food, that she's allowed to do that outside of bezdin, and all she has to do is v'choseves. She has to write the mizonos mocharti. She just has to say that it's for the sake of mizonos. Again, we're at the end of the Mishnah in Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis. The Mishnah closes with a piece of Gemara that we learned yesterday on Yantiv. Grusha lo timkor ela bebezdin. That a woman who's a grusha, she can only make a sale for her ksuba in bezdin. Masnisan money. Who is the author of the Tanakama's shita in our Mishnah? Let's review. The Tanakama of our Mishnah was of the opinion that once a person makes a partial sale, they could know once a woman makes a partial sale of a property to try and capture some of her ksuba. Let's say she only collects 50% with this property, and now she wants to collect the next 50%. The Tanakama said she no longer has the right to do the normal sale of a property. Now she can only do it in bezdin. So the Gemara asks, must he send money? And the Gemara responds, Reb Shimon he. Our Mishnah, the Tanakam of our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. The Tanya, the Brisa writes as follows: Machra ksubasa, if a woman were to sell land equal to the cost of her whole ksuba, or mashkana ksubasa, or if she places a piece of property as collateral for her whole ksuba, asasa ksubasa aputiki la'acher, or she makes her ksuba collateral for another person. In all cases, ein la mizonos. What does Reb Shimon say? Reb Shimon Omer, afal pisha lo machra v'lo mashkana ksubas ela machzisa of the mazonozeh, just like our Mishnah, that even if you only sell a partial, you still lose your rights to sell them, and that, of course, aligns with Reb Shimon and the Tanakam of our Mishnah, and Reb Shimon match perfectly. But the Gemara has a problem with this, because in an unrelated sugya, we see that Reb Shimon doesn't hold to this templating like we have over here in our Mishnah. The Memra, is that to say, 12 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, is that to say, the Reb Shimon Savar, de lo amrina and mixas kesef kechol kesef, that we have a different halacha when she has mixas kesef, when she only has part of the money owed to her, versus when she sells a property worth her whole ksuba? Does he hold that those things are not the same? V'Rabbanon sabre amrinan mixas kesef kechol kesef, and the Rabbanon would agree that whether or not she sold part of the property or all of the property worth her ksuba, that there is a difference. How can you say that? We have a brisa that seems to tell us that Reb Shimon holds the exact opposite in this regard. Now, this brisa has to do with a Kohen Gadol. We know that a Kohen Gadol can only marry a particular woman, and the brisa gives us some of the details. The Tanya, the brisa writes, "V'hu isha bivsuleha." The pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Vayikra. The whole pasuk reads, "V'hu the Kohen Gadol isha bivsuleha yikach." Now, of course, we know that there are many ways for a woman to lose her bisulim. She can have tashma shamita. She can be a mukas eitz. She can be a bogeres, and just as she ages, the integrity of the basulim disintegrates, and she may not have a basulim at all by the time she gets married. By the time she's older, happens. These are shilas that happen all the time nowadays. On the night of a chuppah, a couple will say, "We're not sure if maybe we consummated our marriage. We're not sure, but there was no blood. We don't know." So it may just be that there was no basulim, but once a couple has consummated their marriage, so then we halachically assume that there was dam, and they have to separate as a nida. Again, this is only talking about a woman who was a basula. So a woman who gets married in her young 20s, she may not have a basulim at all, no blood at all. So they're nafkaminas here in halacha. The poskim, it's a very uncomfortable question about whether or not they actually consummated their marriage and if they should try again. These are shilas and poskim, and every Masada Kedushin knows that they have to leave their phone on the night that they're Masada Kedushin because shilas come in all the time. They're real shilas that come in all the time. Anyways, this brisa speaks about a Kohen Gadol and says what happens if she's a bogeres. The pasuk says, "V'hu isha b'suleha." He can only marry a virgin. Prat. This is to exclude the bogeres. Shekalu b'sulah divi Reb Meir. Reb Meir was of the opinion that the Kohen Gadol cannot marry a woman whose basulim have disintegrated, have gone away on their own. Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon machshirin b'bogeres. They say there's nothing wrong with a bogeres. The Kohen Gadol can still marry a bogeres. That she didn't sleep with anyone. She's still a basula. What are they arguing about? The definition of a basula. Is a basula a woman who doesn't have a basulim? Or is a basula a woman who has had intercourse? This is the chakira that they're trying to figure out. Does he inherently need to marry someone who has a basulim? In which case, whether or not there's tashmish shemitah is irrelevant. She could be a mukas eitz also. He won't be able to marry her. So that's the machlokas over here. So the Gemara is bothered because what do we see over here by Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon was of the opinion that machshirin bebogeres. Bogeres, she doesn't have a basulim. So she doesn't have a basulim. And also in a case where she does have a basulim, they're the same. So that doesn't align with the Reb Shimon that we just saw in our Mishnah, where mixas kesef is not kekesef. So we're looking at this broad alignment, a template of how to look at questions and answers, and the Gemara says that is not a good argument. Reb Shimon may well agree to the principle that we laid out over here, which is the lo amrina mixas kesef kechol kesef, that a partial payment is not the same as a full payment, and you can't ask from a case of bogeres to basula. Why not? Because hasan bekroi pligi. They're just this is like the biblical exegetical, like how do we learn every letter in Chumash? That's difference between them. So it's different. It's not. This isn't the principle of full ksuba paid for partial. You can't compare full ksuba and partial ksuba to full basula and bogeres. It's not comparable because that was just darshaning psukim. And the Gemara now goes through, as we saw in a previous Masech that we saw in Yevamos, how this was learned out. Reb Meir Savar, Bisula, really, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says bivsuleha. But let's look at each part of the word. Bisula, what does that teach us? Afilu mixas besulim, even if there's only part of the besulim. What does besuleha teach us? The ikakulu besulim, until we know that there's a full besulim. Bivsuleha, bichadarka in, there's a different halacha if they've had tashmish shemitah kidarka, regular normal intercourse, or shelo kedarka lo. There are different halachos. So the only time that she'd be limited, according to Rav Meir, is if the tashmish shemitah was regular tashmish shemitah. But tashmish shemitah shelo kedarka would not be a psul for the Kohen Gadol to marry her. And all of that is the way that Rav Meir learns out the limud. What about Reb Elazar, Reb Shimon? 2 lines from the bottom. Sabre, they learn the psukim differently. The word besula in bivsula, how the root of the word teaches us shlema mashma. It implies that it should be a shlema, that it should be a full besulim. However, besuleha, it teaches us afilu b'mixas besulim. So therefore, the halacha would change a little bit. And as we turn to the top of Tzadi Chesed Aleph, the final part of the drasha is bivsuleha sheyehu kol besulah kayam and bein bichadarka bein shelo kedarka. Reb Shimon has a totally strict line. No tashmish shemitah, even shelo kedarka. That would be a psul for him, even though there's no basulim when it comes to be a shelo kedarka. It doesn't matter. She cannot have intercourse of any kind. So the Gemara is basically responding. We understand Reb Shimon as it relates to our Mishnah. Reb Shimon is our Tanakam. How can you say that Reb Shimon is of the opinion that mixas kesef and kesef proper are not the same? Hare, he distinguishes between a basul and a bogeres. Doctor, do you have one of those cough drops in your pocket? I'll take one. I'll start with 2, and you can send me a bill in addition to my tuition. Thank you very much.
Get a couple more.
We're good. I'll start. How much was my tuition, by the way? Can we discuss that?
Being recorded.
My tuition bill this year is $95,000 for my kids.
Mine is 0.
That was not nice. That was the second best line in Daf Yomi. The second best line. Second best line. Doctor, on your game. What can I say? So the Gemara says, yes, our Mishnah is still, the Tanakama is still Reb Shimon, and you can't ask a question for Bogeres and Basul and Bogeres in contrast with partial ksuba payment and full ksuba payment. They're just not comparable. And the Gemara says, how do we paskin? And the Gemara tells us a little bit of a story. Tzadi Chesed Aleph, second line. Hahi itza The tafsa casa de kaspa b'ksubasa. This woman wanted to collect part of her ksuba. She sees a beautiful silver cup. It's got the little 925 imprint in the bottom. She knows how much it's worth. It's worth 100 zuz. Her ksuba is worth 200 zuz. So she gets half payment with the silver cup. And then katava mizone, and then she wanted to have mizonos. Now we know in our Mishnah, Reb Shimon would not have that. Reb Shimon would have said, once you made a partial payment, you have to do the rest in Bezdin. You can't just take things anymore. So also lakame de Rava, they went to go ask a shaila from Rava. And what is Rava paskin? Amar lahu, no. Amar lahu liyasme. He says zilu havale mizonos. He says you still need to feed her mizonos. Why? Leis dechash lahad Reb Shimon. Nobody holds of the shita of Reb Shimon who says the Amar. Lo amrina and mixas kesef kechol kesef. There's no such thing. We don't paskin like Reb Shimon. We paskin like the Chachamim. And a woman can make 5 different grasps or grabs from properties within the home without bezdin, no problem at all. She has to be spot on. She can't take more than she's owed. That's gneva. But if she says the kiddush cup is worth 100 and the candlestick is worth 100 and my ksuba is 200, shalom al Yisrael, no problem. We don't paskin like Reb Shimon. Halacha l'maisa. When a Gemara gives us a Maisa about a psak, it's even stronger than a regular psak of like a Hilchasa in the Gemara, because you have a Maisa that comes along with it. The Gemara says that's because it's a Gadol Talmud Shemevi Lidei Maisa. Like learning is a wonderful thing. Anyways, let's continue. The Gemara now asks a question, 6 lines down. Shalach le Rabba Berei de Rava de Rav Yosef. When a woman is mocheres shelo bebezdin, so this woman walks in, she wants to take the kiddush cup. She knows that her ksuba is worth 200. She's an almana now. And she wants to take the kiddush cup, which is worth 100 zuz. That's a very expensive kiddush cup. So does she have to make a shvuah? I mean, that's a great question. Something that we should all be thinking about, because how can she just take stuff? Like, it's got to be like some checks and balances. So the Gemara wants to know if she's going to walk over and take the kiddush cup, does she have to make a shvuah? A shvuah that she's taking what's due to her, that she's not overtaking. Oh, ain't tzricha shvuah. Which one? Says the Gemara, forget that. You should have asked a different question, that she should have full disclosure of all of her finances, public record. She should be writing down, Chana the almana, she took whatever, a little public record. Omar Lei says back to him, no, hachraza lo kami baili. I'm not asking about a case of hachraza. I'm only asking about a case of shvuah. How can that be? Hachraza, this public disclosure of her takings from the home, that was public. Everybody knew about it. Says the Gemara, because when in the world of Reb Zera there was no hachraza. To Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rav Nachman, almana sheshama la'atzma, an almana, a woman who was collecting her ksuba, and sheshama, she made an assessment on her own. Lo asasava lo klum. That's what Reb Zera says. What does he mean? Hey Chidami, what is the case where that happens? Ide achruz, if it was a staple, a requirement for her to disclose all of the things that she took. Amai lo asasava lo klum. Why would Reb Zera say that it's as if nothing ever happened? Of course, it's like something happened. It's publicly. It's like a line item in what she did. Everybody knows what Chana the Almana took. Everybody knows. Elalav, it must be that in the case of Reb Zera, de lo achruz, there was no public announcement of what she took. Ula'atzmu de lo asasav lo klum. And if she were to make the assessment on her own, it's a 0. Hala'acher, but if other people are involved, then masha asasav, and what she took is reasonable. So again, hadra kusha laduchta, do we say that a shvuah needs to be made when she takes something? Yes or no? And the Gemara responds, Le'olam, really, it's not correct. Really, even in the case of Reb Zera, it was also the achruz, where the prices were listed. Ude amrei lach, but they said to her, Man sham lich, who gave you the right to take this particular item? And this story that follows expresses this idea. Ki haidahu gavra, de'afkidu gabe kisisa diyasme, where a person had entrusted the kisisa, this is like animal feed, of the asomim, Ozal shama lenafshe be'arba me'azuze. I care kam b'shismeya. He was holding on to it, and it had a street value of 400, and then the price went up to 600. Asa lekame de Ravami, and he says, Amar le man shamla, who gave you permission to do this? So the Gemara is a little bit unclear here about what she's allowed to take and what she's not allowed to take. And the Gemara concludes, again, without enough shakla v'tarya really to give us clarity in the Gemara. We do need Rishonim here to understand this better. The halacha is, and this is very strange, because we just said that Reb Zera's case could also be b'hachraza. So why is it that we would now say that hachraza isn't a requirement? L'maisa, if a woman were to take a property toward her ksuba, she would have to make a shvuah. That's the din in the Gemara. Next Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down on Sadi Chesem at Aleph. We're going to be stopping in about an amud from now, about 3/4 of the way down on Sadi Chesem at Beis. The Mishnah writes, Almana shahayisa ksubasa masayim. A woman's husband died. She was due a ksuba of 200 zuz. Umachra shvei mana b'masayim. She's good at her job. So she sold a property that was worth 100 and she sold it for 200. Next, Shave Masayim B'mana. Or she sold it, not so good at her job. Or she sold a 200 zuz property, perfectly equivalent to her ksuba, but she did a bad job of selling. She didn't have the patience, or someone swindled her. She only sold a b'mana. The halacha is kabla ksubasa. It's as if she received her ksuba. Next case in our Mishnah. Hayasa ksubasa mana. First case was a 200 zuz. Now we have a case of a 100 zuz ksuba. Umachra, and she sold a property from the husband's estate that was shave mana v'dinar b'mana. She sold a property that was worth 101 zuz, and she sold it for 100. Let's get the case crystal clear, because otherwise we will not understand what's going on here. Her ksuba was only 100 zuz. She took an item that was 101 zuz from the estate, and she sold it for a mana. In cash, she got exactly what she deserved. However, what she sold was above the price point of her ksuba, even by 1 dinar. So, is she allowed to sell that property? So says the Mishnah, absolutely not. Machra batel. You cannot take more than, that's geneva. You cannot take more than you are allowed to take in order to pay yourself off. Even though the market value of that 101 is your ksuba of 100, it doesn't matter. You cannot, it's literally geneva. You cannot go into someone's property and take 101 zuz when your ksuba is only 100. Not allowed. That makes perfect sense. The Gemara says machra batel. It's a zero. It's not. We look at it as geneva. It's not even geneva. The transaction did not happen. Zero. Didn't even happen. The Chachamim say that this is not right. This is not going to work. Done. Afilu hi omeretz achzer dinar liyorshin. Even if she says, I'm going to pay back the one extra, doesn't matter. You can't take from the husband's estate anything more than what your ksuba is worth. Rashba Gomer, okay, let's see how this works out. First of the long lines. Le'olam michrakaya, really, it will count. Ad, and we're not going to go into detail here. We'll learn about this later in the Gemara, not today, but Mir Hashem tomorrow or the next day. Le'olam machrakayim, it does count. It counts unless there is a leftovers of Tisha Kabin, Ubegina Bas Chatzikav, Uchaliva Beis Rova. We're going to dig into these halachos at a later point. You can see Rashi here for some of the details here. We're not going to go into it now because we're going to spend a lot of time on it in the future. So that's case number 2. The Rashbag does have an exception to the rule. Last case of our Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom. Hayasak Subasa Arba Meozuz, rich husband. He puts together for her when they get married. She has a ksuba of 400 zuz. Then says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Umachra lezebemane ulezebemane. She takes one property worth 100 and sells it to Reuven, another property worth 100 and sells it to Reuven, to Shimon, and then onwards and onwards. And then for the last person, Ula'acharon, Yafe mane v'dinar b'mane. She sold a property worth 101, which puts her over the top. Now her total is 401 for her, but only the 4th person was the one who got too much. There, what does the Gemara say? Shel achron batel v'shel kulan michron kayim. We don't aggregate the sales, all of hers. They're not all bad sales. Just the last one was a bad sale, similar to the previous. Why would we think this is any different than the previous sale? Of course, it should be batel. Why would you assume? Why would you go back in time and say that the sale to Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, which only totals 300 of her 400, why would we ever say that that's batel? That's the previous case of the Gemara, so we'll discuss that as well. Asks the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom as the Gemara opens, Sarich Chesim Aleph. Ma'ishna shevei masayim b'mana. Why is it that in the case of a property that's worth 200, she's a bad businesswoman and she only makes 100? To amrei la at afsadet, you lost out. You're a bad businesswoman. Your ksuba is now done, even though you only have 100 in hand. But the property you took from the husband was 200. Shevei mane b'masayim nami tema ana arvachna. If she's going to be absorbing the losses, she should be absorbing the gains as well. So says the Gemara, why would we not say that in our Mishnah? What did we say in our Mishnah? This is a ksuba. She's done. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, turning to the top of Tzadi Chesem and Beis. Kan Shana Rebbe, Hakol leBaal Hamaos. Our Mishnah is like the sheet of Rebbe. That's how Rashi explains here. Top Rashi, the Ramaskal Kan Shana Rebbe, b'Mishnah Seinu Lamadnu Rebbe. or limdenu Rebbe taught us that everything really belongs to the Baal Hamos, really belongs to the husband. So that means that, okay, that's her loss, granted, but it's still going to be her ksuba in both cases. Kidatanya, and this requires a few steps to get to where we need to get to. So let's hold cup for a little bit. Not very difficult, but it does have a few steps. Kidatanya. Let's say hosifu lo achas yasera. A person is going to make a sale, and they add one more thing in the sale. Hakol shaliach. So then the proceeds would go to the shaliach Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to basically ignore this opinion for now because it has nothing to do with what we're learning, other than it's the Baal Plugta of the following person. Rabbi Yossi Omer Cholkin. Rabbi Yossi says if there's extra money after the shaliach does what he does, remember the shaliach made a change. Now, I'm the owner, and I say I want you to sell this property, and it's it's a property worth 100, and I want you to sell it and make 100, whatever I say, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to sell 2 properties. So what about the extra cash? The shaliach made an extra decision. So what does Rabbi Yossi say? Cholkin, that the shaliach and the Baal Habayis are cholek, they split the proceeds. Says the Gemara, how can Rabbi Yossi say that? V'hatanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, hakol Baal Hamos. Not true. Everything goes to the Baal Hamos. So we have Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Yossi, that doesn't work. And the Gemara's answer of Rabbi Yossi is our Mishnah. Amar Rami Bar Chama lo kasha. Kan bedavar sheyesh lo kitzva, kan bedavar she'ein lo kitzva. It depends if the pricing in the market is fixed or if this is going to be an unfixed price. It's a negotiated price. And we don't know yet what's what, but Rav Papa will explicitly tell us. We already have our answer from Rami Bar Chama, and then Amar Rav Papa, Hilchasa, Davar sheyesh lo kitzva. If we're talking about something that has a fixed price and the shaliach did a little bit more selling than he should have, and there's extra proceeds, cholkin, that gets split between the Baal Habayis and the shaliach. However, and this is our Mishnah, Davar she'ein lo kitzva, hakol Baal Hamos. When there's something that it isn't a kitzvah in the market, at least. So then that is something where everything goes back to the husband. And our Mishnah is like Rebbe as he understood the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. And then the Gemara is bothered by the fact that Rami Bar Chama already gave us the answer of Rabbi Yossi. Why did Rav Papa have to come along and say, Hilchasa, Davar sheyesh lo kitzvah? We already had this halacha. Why does Rav Papa double over on the comment? Says the Gemara, my kamashmalan. Answers the Gemara, Rav Papa came along for an important reason. It's a very simple reason. We shouldn't be thrown by this. It's very simple. Shinuya deshaninan, shinuyahi. The answer that we got from Rami Bar Chama, distinguishing between yesh lo kitzvah and ein lo kitzvah, and the two sides of Rabbi Yossi, one where it's cholkin, that's where it's yesh lo kitzvah, and one where it's all to the Baal Habayis, where it's ein lo kitzvah, that was a real answer. And therefore, that seems to be the conclusion of the Gemara, like our Mishnah, as Rebbe understood our Mishnah, that everything goes to the Baal Hamos, which really falls back to the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, as Rabbi Bar Chama understood the Shitas of Rabbi Yossi. Ibaylahu, the Gemara asks a question, taking this idea a little bit further. Amar le, the Baal Habayis says to his servant, he says to his shaliach, do me a favor, zavin li lischa, go sell me a property that is worth a lischa, or that's the size of a lischa. And then the shaliach, hey, he's an aggressive guy, wants to impress the boss, looking for a raise. Ve'azal v'zavin le kura. And then he goes and he sells a property. A kura is double the size of a lesech. And he sells a property instead of, I'm just going to change to our terminologies. Instead of it being 1 acre, he sold 2 acres of property. Says the Gemara, do we say, and let's get into the lamdas of this, do we say the shaliach was simply mosif al dvarav, and yes, he sold a double size of the field, but v'lischa mihakani, the first acre, the first lesech, actually was kona, or because the shaliach did more than he was asked. When the shaliach does more than he was asked, do we bifurcate the two things into two? We say, okay, the first half of what he did, good to go. The second half of what he did, he went too far. Or do we say the shaliach is a rebel and didn't listen to his boss? His boss's instructions were to sell a lesech and he sold a kur. So I don't know. So I think of this as like in parenting, like sometimes kids do exactly half, maybe 49% of what you ask them to do. They did some of what you asked them to do. Do you praise them for that, or do you say you haven't been listening at all? So this shaliach is that rebellious child. We don't know how to respond. Do we say you did it half right, you get credit for half, and it's as if the proceeds will go back to the Baal Habayis, the sale of the lesech is valid? This is the chakir of the Gemara, third of the way down. Mosif al dvar v'lischa mihakani. Odilma, perhaps no. The shaliach was mavir al dvaravu. You did not do what I asked. Doing half of what I asked is not what I asked. I didn't even ask you to sell a kur. I asked you to sell a lesser. You took my words, you changed them, you uprooted them, and you did more. So that's our question in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, almost halfway down, and we're going to learn about 12 more lines or so, and then we're going to pause for the night. Amar Rav Yaakov minahar pekod mishmei de Ravina. Toshma, let's see if we can bring a raya. Amar bala bayis l'shlucho. The owner of the house, I'll be the owner, and I say to my shaliach, Tein lahen chaticha laorchen, please cut a piece of corned beef for all of my guests, a nice fine cut. Vihu omer tlushtayim. The shaliach says, don't just take one piece, take two pieces. V'heinat lushalosh. And the gluttonous guests, they said, the balabai said, only take one. The shaliach said, I could even have two. I've got a stomach to fill. I'm going to have three. And then we find out that really this meat is subject to me'ilah, that you're not allowed to eat it in the first place. Says the Gemara in the Brisa, kulan ma'alu. The owner, the shaliach, and the people eating at the table all violated me'ilah. Now, if you want to say that we do bifurcate the actions that he did well and the actions that were not done well, then we understand. Because each person stands in their own space. I understand. If you want to say, if you want to say that when the shaliach offers two slices of corned beef, it means he's not listening properly, and it means he didn't do what the balabais asked him to do. If that's true, then the balabais should not be chayiv at all. Why not? Because if he would have given one piece like the balabais asked him to do, he's simply an extension of the hand of the shaliach. I asked you to do X, you did X. You're me. I did a bris this morning. I said to the father, do you want me to be your shaliach? She responded for him, yes, I want you to be the shaliach. And I'm like, it's not your mitzvah. He's like, okay, fine. You can be my shaliach. He and I are the same thing. Do I get the mitzvah d'oraisa, the kiyum of bris milah? No. I'm a facilitator. I don't know, whatever the language is. When he listens exactly, give them one piece of corned beef, and he gives it to them. And he listened well, and it turned out to be me'ilah, that all falls back on the balabais. However, lo asa shlichuso, if in fact the shaliach violated what he was told to do, give them one slice. He's like, no, I'll give them two. You're a bad shliach. And if that's true, shliach ma'al. So the Gemara is saying maybe we have a raya that Mosif al Dvarav is really correct, that we do accept, we bifurcate the actions of what you should have done and then the additional. What you should have done, we accept, thank you very much for your service. What you shouldn't have done, we throw back in your face. That's what the Gemara is trying to bring a raya for. And says the Gemara, not necessarily, because hacha b'maya skinan. In this case of me'ilah, what could have been going on? The subtext, what was happening here that we didn't know about? The Gemara is going to present a new kimta. Hacha b'maya skinan to Amar Lahu Chilu achas midaito shel balabais ve'achas midaiti. He's very explicit. Yes, my guests, take the one piece that the balabais wants you to have. A second one is on my cheshbon. He's very, very, very clear about it. And in such a case, v'shaklu inhu tzlas, and then they took the third one. Yes, that may be what the Bryce is talking about, where all three of them are guilty. That's very possible. So therefore, we don't have a raya from this brisa because we just gave this ukimta. We don't have a raya of Mosif al Dvarav versus Mavir al Dvarav. We don't yet have enough information. So tomorrow, we're going to pick up at the Tashma, 6-7 lines from the bottom. We'll learn Daf Tzadi Tes. We'll learn Daf Kuf Amud Aleph because tomorrow's Thursday. No shiur Friday morning, in person on Shabbos, and then we'll pick up again with the Yontif schedule. But we'll stop. We're going to stop here, and then tomorrow we're going to take another stab at trying to figure out whether or not the rebellious shaliach, we embrace what he did, at least in part, or not. We'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night. I didn't say that.